another thing I really struggled with was just feeling like this lack of connection and this lack of purpose. And like, you kind of go and you work this job that you don't really like, and you just keep slugging away at it for your whole adult life. And then you retire and then you die. And that was not appealing to me. And somehow hunting, like, it's weird to say it gave me purpose, but I think it just connected me to the realness of like what it means to be a human. That sounds really cheesy, but I think I always just knew that there was more than just, going to work and punching a time card and coming home and watching TV and going to bed. And hunting was kind of the first thing I did where it was like, there was this amazing purpose. It had meaning for me. And it just like, it changed everything. And it pushed me in different ways. It made me like learn more about animals than anything I'd ever done. It made me understand how ecosystems work. And it's just like, it's like this extra challenge. Like it just gives a purpose, I think.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. The Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Sig Sauer. SIG is a leading provider and manufacturer of firearms, electro-optics, ammunition, air guns, and suppressors. For over 250 years, Sig Sauer Inc. has evolved and thrived by blending American ingenuity, German engineering, and Swiss precision. Today, Sig Sauer is synonymous with industry-leading quality and innovation, which has made it the brand of choice amongst the U.S. military, the global defense community, law enforcement, competitive shooters, hunters, and responsible citizens. Sig Sauer is also a premier provider of elite firearms instruction and tactical training at the Sig Sauer Academy located in New Hampshire. For more information about Sig Sauer and its complete line of products, visit sigsauer.com. Okay, what is the most challenging and interesting thing you've ever done?
Oh gosh, that is a really great first question. So I spent a lot of time by myself in the backcountry, and going out there, I think pretty much every time I go out there, I run into something that's kind of like a life or death moment where I'm like, oh, maybe all those other times I was wrong and I was overestimating myself and I just got really lucky. And now I'm faced with this, and can I really push through this? So I think, gosh, to pick just one is hard. I mean, I've had a lot of instances where all of a sudden, a lot of it has to do with hypothermia, where I'm stuck in a situation where I'm so cold that my extremities are becoming useless and it's just me. And there's no button I can press where help is going to come immediately and save me. Like by the time anyone would ever find me, it would be way too late. I think every time I find myself in that situation, I'm like, really, Laura, you did it again? Because that's kind of more common than I would like to admit. But such is the case with pushing myself, and the wild is unpredictable, which is also what I love the most about it.
Hypothermia is a really tough one. There was an obstacle we had to go through in the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School called the Individual Movement Course. And most of the year, it's like, I don't know, it takes like 15 minutes. It's not a big thing. It's not something that people necessarily remember, but it was in Quantico, Virginia. And this particular winter was a cold one. They got like 3 feet of snow all in one storm. It was staying down in the teens and low 20s. And to go through this movement course, a lot of it was underwater, and we had to break up the ice with sledgehammers, and there was barbed wire going over the top. So you kind of had to shove your face down in the mud and get through all this water and mud and everything, and somehow try to keep a gun, functioning throughout all that, which was impossible. But everybody got hypothermia. And there was a dude who was an NCAA national champion cross-country runner. And this guy was a total rabbit. He was running the 3 mile in like 14 minutes flat or something ridiculous like that. He also had 0% body fat. So when he went through that course, he almost died. It almost killed him. And I remember all of us standing in a shower trying to warm up afterwards, and it's a like Marine Corps shower. There's like, 180 dudes in there. And I was watching this kid have a heart attack from hypothermia because his body temperature got down into the low 80s. And I knew what to do, but I couldn't do it. I was so non-functional that I couldn't like do anything to help him. And he lived through it. He got kicked out of the Marines. He wasn't able to make it through the training. So he didn't get to become an officer. But hypothermia is a really tough one because you almost feel trapped like within yourself. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Like I relate to that so much, like the feeling of wanting to do something and not being able to. And I think I'm so used to not being necessarily good at anything, but just using my mental grit to get me through situations. And I really learned that there's a point with that where if you cross a threshold, there's no amount of mental toughness that is going to push you through your body literally just shutting down on you. And that you just can't. I mean, maybe some like crazy monks or something who have full control of, their heartbeat and whatever can do that. I mean, I think it's pretty much impossible. And just being out in those situations, yeah, you feel completely helpless. You can't use your grit. And that's my secret weapon. So it's like, I've had to learn to use kind of mental tricks in the beginning stages to prevent me from reaching those, because I think, your mind can be your best friend and your worst enemy, depending on how you use it. And when you get used to toughing things out, I think it's easy to like, I don't know, you almost lull yourself into complacency by being like, well, I'm just being a wuss. This is just cold. I can deal with cold. And it's like, no, you got to kind of detach from your ego a bit and be able to assess things from a non-emotional standpoint. And that's really the only thing you can do in that situation. I think it's interesting because people go out in the wilderness and they always think it's going to be these glorious, glamorous things like bear attacks is going to get them. And it's like, maybe not as glamorous, but it's definitely a lot more real and a lot more common.
It is. And, there is mental toughness, which can carry you through more things than not, for sure. But there's also physical limitations. And there comes a point where your fingers don't work anymore. And right after that, your hands don't work anymore. And if you can't do things with your hands, you get really limited in the ways that you can actually get warm again. And
exactly.
That is tough.
I wanted to build a fire.
Oh, I was going to bring it up. Jack London.
That I read that when I was young and it stuck with me. And I swear every time I've gotten to that point, I think about that story. I think of all the things I've ever read that made the biggest impact of me and is probably the story that I've read the most, or thought about the most rather.
Yeah. And I love dogs. And I know that Jack London did too. So I try to imagine myself, in his position, and he's writing about this guy who grabs his dog, hoping that he can, kill his dog so that he has a way to warm his hands up so that he can, relight this fire, and how horrible of a situation that must be. I think it's one of the greatest short stories ever written, certainly by an American, hands down top 5.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I feel like if anyone hasn't read it, like you need to read it. It doesn't take long and it's just so good.
That's one of the things that I love about short stories. I feel like whenever you read something, you're bringing into it everything that's going on in your life, and that's going to change day to day. The way I feel today is very different from the way I felt yesterday. It's different from how I'm going to feel tomorrow. So if I'm reading a novel, I'm bringing to this novel everything that's going on in my life. With a short story, I can read it all at once in one sitting, and there's a unity of effect that goes with that. And I think it's really important to get that out. And I've never seen a novel in my life that couldn't stand to have like 50 pages removed.
Totally. No, I'm 100% with you. It's like short, to the point, and man, like clearly that's stuck with me for a very long time. Like it's powerful. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
What are some other pieces of writing that you like?
Oh gosh. Well, I can't really read. So no. I mean, I like when I was a kid, I think that's when I read the most. I wasn't adventuring as much as I am now. So I would adventure in the world of stories. So I was reading books when I was really young that, probably I shouldn't have been reading. But I think honestly, those are books that really had an impact on me. Like definitely Jack London was one of them. I think like when I was really young, reading some of the, kind of the kid classics like Hatchet, My Side of the Mountain. I actually read, Into the Wild, like when I was probably, I don't know, maybe 10. And that book, which, now was made into a movie, that really affected me as well and really inspired me. He had lived as a train hopper and was hitchhiking, and I wanted to travel, didn't have any money. And like, that's what I was doing. And not at 10, but when I got a little older, but I didn't really piece it together at the time. But I was like, man, yeah, like that really inspired me as far as, just what was possible. And just that sense of adventure, I think really sparked a lot in me. And now that I'm a little older, like I'm reading, I don't read as much kind of fiction and stories. I feel like I want to get back into doing that. But when I do read, it's like facts, like I want to like absorb information on something. So I'll read something as boring as like Rocky Mountain Wildflower Guide and just go through the entire thing and read everything in it. But I definitely have a stack of books. This summer in particular, I've had people be like, Laura, you're not reading these books we're telling you to read. We're giving them to you, because I don't like the electronic stuff. Like I have to hold it. So I have a stack of books that I'm just going to start taking with me and reading again, because that's like one of the big things that I'm like, man, I miss it. Like I used to write a lot and I used to read a lot. And lately I haven't been doing either as much as I want to be.
Well, good on you for getting back after it. I think that's awesome. It's not an easy thing to do. So many aspects of our lives are compartmentalized into these little tiny chunks anymore. And if something, seems insurmountable, like reading a 1,000-page book, then we'll just avoid it. But it's still worth doing from time to time.
It is interesting. I mean, I feel like I'm going on these backcountry trips. I'm trying to have the least amount of stuff as possible, so I don't read then. But then I come back and I'm like, I got to get caught up on my emails. I got to like go, I could endlessly spend time trying to catch up on social media, stuff like that. And it's like, these aren't things that I would necessarily value if our world wasn't what it is, but there's also the value in it and like sharing what I'm doing. And so it's hard. And I feel like you have to make these rules almost like, okay, I'm putting a time cap on this because this is also important. And you need to almost make it mentally as important as the other things that you have in your life.
How does art influence your life?
Well, I think the art that I have the most are probably more like antlers and furs and like arranging them in ways that makes me happy. I do like art that's kind of a little dark. I think a lot of the stuff I have is like hides and bones and skulls, right? And I mean, you probably can see I have like this really creepy like picture in the background, which the listeners can't see, but I have some kind of creepy taste in art. And I think for me, it's like kind of death makes me realize how important life is. Like that's kind of like the whole memento mori idea of just like being reminded of death makes you live better. And it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm glamorizing death as much as I'm really accepting that it's happens to all of us and you need to make it count, because the time we have is the time we have and you never know how much it is. So it's like every single day I want to remember that it's important to be alive, and that wasting time, wasting days, putting things off that you want to do, there's going to be a point where that's not an option anymore. Like time is done. So I think in a way, like a lot of the art that I have is literally just the kind of weird, creepy, dark stuff to remind me of that. But I'm a really happy person. That makes me sound like I'm, some like strange little goth kid that's like angry at the world. But yeah, it's kind of how I relate to it.
I don't think it's creepy or dark to recognize that, life eats life, that we're consumers of other animals, and eventually something is going to consume us, and to recognize and appreciate that. I don't think that's weird at all. Maybe that means I'm weird too in the same way. I don't know.
We're just weirdos here together. How does art influence you? Like, do you find a lot of influence in your life in art?
I'm really interested in tattoo culture, and I'm so grateful to live in a time where it's becoming so accepted. It's no longer a big deal to have tattoos. And, when I go places, especially, I don't know, especially anywhere, but I'll ask like, hey, do I need to wear long sleeves for this? And anymore, it's like, it's just not a big deal. And I think tattoos have such a long and rich history within hunting and within people who live in wild places. I don't know. That's an aspect of art that I really appreciate a lot. And then the rest is just wildlife art. And then my house is completely covered in skulls and hides. And it's kind of getting hard to find new places for new things. But I'm not stopping.
I know, me neither. I just pile them on further onto my crazy antler throne to where I'm kind of scared sometimes I'm just going to end up poking an eye out sitting down, but you know what? It's worth it.
Yeah, you definitely want to sit in that thing sober.
I know, for sure. It's kind of like it's definitely not safe for work, but keeps me on my toes. You got to like add elements of danger into your house if you're not out in the wilderness, right? Like, can't just get complacent.
So what's the deal with hyenas? You got a thing for hyenas.
I do. I love them. They're just like, well, first of all, they're obviously super badass animals. And they're also like incredibly misunderstood, in my opinion, right? Like, sure, there are these, bloodthirsty killers as we all think, but like they definitely have a really kind of amazing social structure as well as just like will to live no matter what it takes. And I think a lot of people think of them, they watch like The Lion King when they're young and they think that they're these dirty scavengers, but they're actually, hunters. They hunt most of their food. And will they be opportunistic? Absolutely. But they kind of get this really bad rap. Like whoever's doing PR for hyenas sucks. And I think I kind of relate to that in a way, because I think I've struggled the same. I mean, maybe people have thought I'm a dirty scavenger, maybe, and sometimes I am, but like at the same time, I think just the whole like being misunderstood and having more under the surface maybe than what people immediately judge you for is something that I've really related to. And they're just like crazy badass creatures who are super cool and really beautiful, I think.
Yeah, no, they are cool. They're built weird. Like they're different from everything else. And even like the hyena that I shot, I was like, where does this fall into like other animals? Is this a canine? Is it its own thing? And I'm still not convinced of anything. I feel like a hyena is just a hyena and there's nothing else like it.
Totally.
Such a badass skull, man. Their teeth are just gargantuan and not like long, but sturdy, and just they can crush any bone on the continent. They're so amazing. And the sounds they make are awesome. Like lion sounds are not that cool. Hyena sounds are awesome.
Yeah, I feel the same exact way. I mean, there's like a video on Instagram of like this someone in like, I don't know if it's like a rehab center or whatever, but there's a baby hyena. And it's literally probably the like most adorable sound. Like kind of like just this crazed squealing that
Can you do it?
Yeah. Oh no, I wish I could even like.
You're not even gonna try?
No, I have tried on my own and leave it at that. I'll just pull it up on my phone secretly and like hold it up like I am doing it. But
that's a power play.
They're amazing. But I've never been to Africa and I still have yet to see like a wild hyena. And maybe I'll just hate them when I do, but I seriously doubt that. Like I'm pretty obsessed.
Yeah. Well, they're not an animal that you want to anthropomorphize. And I don't support anthropomorphizing any animal, period. Like let them be what they are. But if you try to place human values on a hyena, you're going to think that they're a bad person and you're not going to like them. But if you look at them like a hyena and appreciate how individual and unique they are and how they fit into this, really badass ecosystem, then you're like, hell yeah, hyenas are awesome.
Oh my God. I mean, just the fact that they're like, I don't know, like I think it's really interesting to just look at like social structure and how, like you said, they're fitting into this environment in a totally crazy way. And when they're working together really well, like the fact that, they can kind of like chase off lions and deal with lions. And I don't know, they're just like pound for pound, just so tough. And it's, I think it's the will to survive, like hearing about hyenas that are, get hurt and like literally like eating their own entrails. I'm like, this is a crazy animal that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, like that's a classic line from anything that Hemingway ever wrote about hyenas, was always that, you know, you'd shoot them and then they'd tear their own guts out at the bullet hole. That's a special attitude to take yourself on like that.
For sure. It's kind of a little inspiration for me, you know. I would never have to do that physically, but maybe like, you know, some kind of mental metaphor for that.
So how do you increase your capacity for mental toughness?
Experience. I truly believe that, like anything else, it's experience. And the more you kind of work that muscle, the bigger and stronger it gets. So I'm definitely not the same person that I was 15 years ago. I think I always had a part of me that kind of wanted to just like push through. Like even when I was little, my parents would go out to rototill the garden and I'd be like, wait, give me a couple hours before, I want to try to do the whole thing with a hoe before you get to it. Like I always had this desire to really just push myself and see what I was capable of, but I didn't have the capacity to stay calm in those situations until I practiced it. And I think it also becomes a little bit addictive. Like I do better in high stress, terrible situations by myself than probably anyone I know, just because that's what I'm used to. And I'm just used to it because I do it a lot. You know, it wasn't like I was born this, you know, weird hermit that was really tough. Like that's just kind of, I've gone out on these crazy things by myself, usually because no one else wants to come and do something that extreme. And then the higher the bar goes, like the more I have to push things to feel uncomfortable. And I'm just so addicted to that discomfort that it's like further and further and further and further. But I mean, I think if you took the me from 15 years ago and you put me out doing the things that I'm doing now, like maybe I would actually physically die. But certainly I would mentally not deal with it as well, but it's just practice. And I think it's something anyone's capable of. I also think that in the world we live in, it's very easy to get lulled into complacency with the comforts we have available at our fingertips. And so you have to make it a conscious choice to push past those comforts. I think we're kind of programmed to want to seek comfort out. I think our ancestors didn't have to seek out discomfort because enough was thrown at them to make it so that, you know, it was always there and they would naturally seek out the comfort. But now in our world, it's really easy to just live in this mediocre comfort kind of middle ground where nothing's really bad and nothing's really great either, but nothing's really bad. And let's just stay here because we don't want to be uncomfortable. It's raining. I don't want to go outside. I'm hungry. I'm going to eat immediately. Or even it's, you know, 12 o'clock and it's lunchtime, I'm going to eat immediately. So I think it's like, it's hard to make that conscious choice. But I think for me, once I started doing it, it was like, oh, there's a whole other world I can tap into. And that's where I want to be, because the lows are lows, but the highs are high. And the contrast makes me appreciate everything so much more.
And how does hunting fit into that?
So hunting for me, I had a weird relationship with hunting. I actually was a vegan back in the day, which is really strange. I was like specifically anti-hunter. I didn't really know any hunters growing up. I just knew I loved animals. I had no idea what hunting was about. And I just thought it was for people to like get the pictures with the animals, you know? And then I kind of like really started to dive into where my food was coming from. And I realized that if I was like practicing what I was preaching, I was doing more damage by having my tofu truck come from wherever it was coming from, or getting strawberries in New England in the middle of the winter. Like, where's that coming from? You know, what kind of animals are like their habitats being destroyed for this farm that I don't even know where it is or what it looks like, what kind of rivers are being diverted to get water to this field. You know, I really started like thinking about that. And I realized that if I wanted to practice what I preached, like I better start hunting. And it actually started with getting roadkill because that was what was available. And I saw it as a waste. And then I had an anthropology professor who was a pretty amazing guy. And he taught me how to build my first self bow. This is back in 2003 and 2003, 2004, it was somewhere right around there. So I started hunting with him and it like changed everything because another thing I really struggled with was just feeling like this lack of connection and this lack of purpose. And like, you kind of go and you work this job that you don't really like, and you just keep slugging away at it for your whole adult life. And then you retire and then you die. And that was not appealing to me. And somehow hunting, like, it's weird to say it gave me purpose, but I think it just connected me to the realness of like what it means to be a human. That sounds really cheesy, but I think I always just knew that there was more than just, going to work and punching a time card and coming home and watching TV and going to bed. And hunting was kind of the first thing I did where it was like, there was this amazing purpose. It had meaning for me. And it just like, it changed everything. And it pushed me in different ways. It made me like learn more about animals than anything I'd ever done. It made me understand how ecosystems work. And it's just like, it's like this extra challenge. Like it just gives a purpose, I think. Like, I'm not the one who's like, I want to go and bag the peak so I can check off what mountains I've climbed. I'm like, I want to go out there and do something that's purposeful and meaningful and like has this connection, makes me understand things more. And for me, that's hunting. And as a bonus, it's like you can be connected to your food and in a really real way. So it was like a huge kind of turning point in my life when I started hunting, and it fueled a lot of other stuff too, I think.
You feel like you love the animals that you hunt more now that you're a hunter than you did when you were a vegan, or less?
Oh, absolutely more. 110% more.
How the fuck does that work? I have the hardest, I feel the same way, but I have the hardest time explaining it.
It's because I understand them. I'm not putting my own qualities and ideals on them. It's like that whole idea of like unconditional love, right? And like, someone's greatest faults, but you love them anyway. But like, when you really get to know someone or something, some animal, that's when you can truly say you love it. Like before, when I was a vegan, I kind of put these like romanticized ideals on what animals were. And they were cool, but like once I really got to know the animals, it was like, whoa, my ideas were not even as cool as this animal really is. Like getting to know even specific animals of specific species. I used to spend time just hunting like specific animals, not even in hunting season and not even to kill them, but just like following certain animals, learning like what side of the tree does this buck naturally step to when he comes to a tree and has to step around it. You start to learn this animal and start to be able to predict what it's going to do in certain situations. And just getting to know something that intimately made me capable of loving it. Like, I don't think I was capable of truly loving these animals before I understood them. And I don't think I could have understood them until I hunted them, because it was just like, otherwise it was just me projecting part of myself onto them. And hunting brought me like real, like life or death dance with this animal that was like, that animal. And it's like, it's just, for me, it was unlike anything I'd experienced. And it was never, I don't know. I mean, I've been hunting where I've come face to face with a weapon in hand with an animal I've been hunting for months. And like, I didn't even end up pulling the trigger because it was like, it wasn't even the point. And maybe I had like enough meat in my freezer at that point. And like, if I needed the meat, I would pull the trigger. And if I didn't, it was like, it wasn't even about, it's still not even about necessarily the kill. Like, I'm never like, yes, I like that thing's dead. Like, yeah, sucker, like get, whatever. It's not like that. And I think for most hunters, that's not, there's like, there's happiness and celebration, but it's not like anything to do with the fact that you ended this animal's life. Because I think in a way, it's just allowed me to understand kind of what it takes to keep me alive. And it's understanding just more about that habitat. And like anyone who's a hunter cares way more about the land than someone who doesn't understand it and how it works in a real sense, not a romanticized Disneyland version.
It does feel good to shoot an animal, hit it good and hard, kill it, walk up on it. That feels good. That's a good feeling. And that's something that a lot of people have a hard time talking about. They don't want to admit that. And it's not enough just to say that it's a good feeling, because it's probably the most complex feeling that I've ever experienced in my life.
Exactly.
And I don't know the words to describe it, but I can give people all the words they need so that they can go out there and have that experience themselves, and then they can try to describe it.
No, and I think that's huge because I think it's important for people to relate to it in their own way and not take on someone else's idea of what it should be or what it's going to be. And I think that to me is like the coolest thing about getting to introduce people to hunting is like, I can show you what I know, but this is like your relationship to this thing. And you may feel completely different. You may feel like similar things, like whatever. It's like, it's your experience and you can't really, I've never really found a way to completely capture it or encapsulate it. Like it always seems to fall short of what it really meant. And it's definitely something that I've struggled with trying to convey, but it's like, I know going into it, where my heart is with it. And I know that I'm not just like some bloodthirsty killer doing it for my own ego. And it's just funny for me to look back at what I used to think hunting was. And I was able to realize that I didn't know everything and stay open to it. And that's kind of what I wish. Like if you grow up thinking something, I know it's hard to change and be open, but like if you go out and you experience it and you still don't like it, cool. But for me, it's like, man, animals are going to be dying for me to eat. If I'm a vegan or not, animals are dying to keep me alive. If you think you're a vegan and animals aren't dying to put food on your plate, like you're just ignorant. Because whether or not you want to think of deforestation and habitat loss to farmland and like everything that does to the land, whether or not you want to acknowledge that that's killing animals, 100% it is. And for me, I would rather know that the animal that I'm eating that's on my plate had a really good life, had a wild life, that I gave it a good death. Because look, we all die, and when animals die, they're not like propped up in a hospital bed with all sorts of comforts on them. Like it's rough. I love pages on Instagram like Nature is Metal, right? Because it shows people like it's not a fairy tale out there. They're not just living this happy life and they're going to live forever. And then, the hunter comes along and destroys things. It's like, it's rough, it's real. And I don't know. I think that's why I love it too, is like to go back to kind of my dark sense of art. It's like, you don't ignore the death when you're out in the wild. Like it's part of it. And I think anyone who thinks that ignoring it is going to make it not happen, it's just because you're not paying attention. So I would rather be aware and be like conscious about it and take part in it in the best way that I possibly can than just like put my head in the sand and pretend that it's not going to happen.
Well, and it's the wild world is so much more of a continuum than the way we look at it. So you can look at a dead tree rotting into the ground and be like, that's a dead tree. But then you can look at a mushroom growing out of it and being like, well, I guess it's more complicated because that's a live fungus and there's a mycelium in there that's communicating these micronutrients to other parts of the forest. So I guess it's not really dead. It just changed forms, right? And that's all that it does. It's a carbon cycle. Everything that's alive is made out of carbon, and that carbon changes forms. That's it.
Exactly. Well, and people get so caught up in like these really dogmatic ideas that they know everything and they're right, and everyone else who doesn't agree with them is wrong. And I think it can, it's kind of like it can be anything. I think hunting's a big one, but it can be in anything. But I think it's like, just, I don't know, man. I just wish people could be a little more open to understanding that maybe they don't know everything. And I mean, for me, I still don't think I know anything about anything. Like, I just like, sure, give me information, and I will always take more information and digest it and like figure out how to process that and make it my own and relate to the world in a way that fits with that. I'm never going to be like, this is how I am. This is always how I'm going to be. I mean, well, like a boring way to go through life, I think. It's just not where I'm at.
Do you think hunters today overemphasize or underemphasize the shooting aspect of hunting?
I think social media has kind of, it can go both ways. Because a lot of times when you're out there, when you're really in it, it's hard to document the entire process on your phone if you're going to be sharing it. It's much easier to document the kill and being there with the animal. And it's almost, I think for some people too, especially if their kind of, persona or brand is revolved around being a hunter, they want to show the successes they have. And so there's like a pressure, and it's really image based, because that's literally what you're putting out there is images. So I don't think that, I think most hunters you would still talk to, it's still about the hunting, but I think that social media has changed pretty much everything in our lives. And I think hunting's one of them. And I think it's something really easy for people to attack And I think that there's just so much emphasis put on that now, especially with people who are like anti-hunting. And even with stuff that I post about, I rarely post about hunting. And, you know, it's part of what I do. It's not all of what I do. And it's like almost so sacred to me. It's like a hard line to walk. But whenever I do, I even get comments about the antler hunting I find, which I'm not killing these animals, and I'm still getting hate from people. And I have definitely found that approaching that, it's like, you have one of two choices. You can like put up a defense wall and attack that person like they attacked you. Or like my dad told me when I was little, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. I don't know why we want to catch flies. Apparently we do. But just like, I'm like, wow, I'm so sorry you feel that way. Like, this is where I was coming from. This is what I was feeling. And 9.5 times out of 10, the people are like, wow, thanks for letting me see it that way. I didn't think about that. Like, I'm sorry. I was kind of an asshole. Like, cool. And I think like it's super hard to do that when people are attacking you and being keyboard warriors. And I also think that, you know, I used to work at a taxidermy shop that was right next to a yoga center. And there was always this duality between them where like there was like a fighting kind of secret underground war between like the yoga girls looking nastily at the, you know, taxidermy shop. And one day I was working alone and this girl like went by and gave me a nasty look. And I'm like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, and I started talking to her. Ended up like, she came into the shop and spent 2 hours talking to me. And when I left, she was like, you know, me and my husband have been fighting for years over the fact that he hunts, but now I want to go with him. You know, and it's like, the more you give someone something to fight against, I think the more they're going to fight it. And I think it's like, there needs to be education that's based on meeting someone where they're at instead of where you wish they were. It was a really long-winded way of like answering your question. I hope
you're doing great. No, people all the time. And I think it's just the type of people that I end up having on the show, but they're always like, I feel like I'm talking too much. It's like, well, that's literally all we're doing. Like, you're the guest, you're here because I'm interested in what you have to say. So ramble on, you're doing good. How do you approach trying to survive in different environments? Like, when I look at some of the survival scenarios that I've seen you in, that I see other people in, I try to put myself in that scenario in my imagination, at least. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if it was something similar to an environment that I've had experience in, it's like, oh, I'd crush it. I'd do great. But if it is a totally different type of climate and environment, I might be in a lot of trouble. But you've seen a lot of different environments. How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's super simple and it's way less technical than anyone would ever think. And literally all I do is like focus on what I have instead of what I don't have. So all survival to me is okay, you know what your basic needs are, what is going to kill you first in an environment. And then you get creative about what do I have around me that can help me meet that need. So you don't even need to know what specific plants are, what specific trees are. Like, definitely if there's something super poisonous that if you touch it, you're going to die, maybe you should know that. But generally speaking, like, you don't even need to know details. It's just like, okay, the first thing that's going to kill me here is dehydration. Like, I'm going to find water. What do I have here that I can creatively use to either procure or clean water if it's dirty? Exposure to elements. That's pretty much the number one, most places that's going to kill you the absolute first. So, all right, I know that I'm a creature that doesn't have a fur coat and no water repellent fur. So what do I need to do to make a shelter where I'm not going to freeze to death if it starts pouring rain? Or, you know, what can I use in my environment to warm up because I'm getting dangerously cold? And it's like one step at a time, and it's staying positive by not being like, man, if only I had this. And I think that's where people get messed up, is they stay in life and in survival, because there's odd parallels, but it's just that mental attitude of like, are you going to focus on what you don't have? Like, what's that going to do for you? Literally nothing, but put you in a bad state of mind. Or are you going to look around and say, well, at least I have this because it could be worse, and like focus on using that. So it's like, it's literally that simple. It's just focusing on the positives and not wishing for the ideal situation, because you're never going to have that anywhere.
You talked about it earlier, where people want to eat as soon as they get hungry, or eat because it's a specific time of day. And I think a lot of people look at a survival situation where somebody doesn't get food on the regular, and they think that the hunger must be the hardest possible thing. And my experience is that that's not the case. What's been your experience with hunger?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I love food. I was definitely the person way back in the day that like, if I didn't have breakfast, I thought I was going to die. And going out, I think that was the most surprising thing for me was like, you have this hunger that, comes when kind of like when your body thinks it's supposed to eat. And then when you know that food isn't available or when it's not your top priority, your body kind of just stops being hungry. And so I've noticed that after the first 12 hours, I don't feel hunger as a physical thing. I might feel it as an emotional thing. Like, man, I wish I had a cheeseburger because that sounds really like emotionally comforting right now. But if it's not there, I mean, I think it would be harder. It's harder to like, if I was dieting and I was trying to not eat foods or fasting and not eat foods that were right in front of me, that's more challenging than being out, knowing food's not an option. And your body just kind of does it. And I think for certain people, it's more their emotional reaction that they need to learn how to manage, because I think that like people who get hangry, I think it's one of the funniest responses ever. And it is not me like trying to talk smack on anyone who gets hangry. Like I was that person, but it's also like, that's good to know if you do that, if you are in a survival situation or are ever in a situation where food's not immediately available. Like it's good to at least know what your body's going to do, but that's mental. That's not physical. That's not actually just like your physiological response to not getting food. It's just mental.
Oh, totally. And whenever somebody gets hangry, they ate that day already. Like they're nutritionally doing all right.
I'm fine.
It is definitely an emotional thing, which isn't to say that it isn't real.
Right.
But just understand, like, you're not starving. You're actually just angry and you're looking to eat your feelings. And that's going to help for a minute.
Right. It's so true. And I think it's like you said, I think that's a really important part, is that just because it's mental doesn't mean it's not real. And everything about survival to me, it's maybe 5 to 10% physical and the rest is mental. It's like, if you are in a bad mental state, your odds of not making it through that situation exponentially go up. And furthermore, you might know nothing, but if you're in a great mental state, I mean, unless you're in some kind of like weird euphoria where you just wander off a cliff, but like if you're in like just a good spirited mental state where you're being optimistic and you're in a survival situation, your odds are like skyrocketing, because you're going to think well, you're going to make good decisions. You're not going to just like, I've been out with people who have been teaching how to survive, and they've literally walked past gold mines in survival situations because they were so negative and like in such a bad state that they were literally blinded by it. So I just like, I don't know, I think learning how to deal with your own mental, like the way you're mentally relating to things, it just helps with everything. And I think the pandemic really brought that out in a really clear way for people to see, is like, we all knew people that, and I'm not minimizing how awful it was for some people and how like terrible it was for some people's livelihoods. But at the same time, I knew people who lost basically everything, and they were still like, but this is a good chance for me to spend time with my family, or like get to, pursue the job I really wanted, or, and there were people who could find the silver lining in the pile of shit. And then there were people who wanted to just like complain and like burrow themselves down and bury themselves in it and not try to fight their way out, because I don't know, I guess it was just what they've mentally conditioned themselves to do. But it's like your entire life can literally change if you can learn to control your own mental attitude. And we really do get to like choose. That's one of the books, actually, Man's Search for Meaning. I have it right here next to me, the Viktor Frankl book. And I don't know if you've ever read it. It's pretty incredible, but it's, he was in the Holocaust and just like these horrific things, but talking about mentally being able to deal with that, and like the people that did well versus the people who didn't, and just like, you're in the most awful situation and the only thing you can control is your brain, and how you can like change your reality based on your ability to control your mind. And I think that's a really extreme example. Like, could I do that? I don't know. I think you don't know what you're capable of until you're in it. But like, it's just a really extreme example of what people can do and how they can change their worlds in a really simple way.
Well, and I think your method for focusing on what you have, not on what you don't have, is really powerful. Like that,
Mhm.
that's a clean, cut and dried system that you can start like as just an operating principle. Like, okay, this is what I have. Let's focus on that. Now, what's around me that can help me? What's available? I think that's really healthy in all aspects of life and business, for that matter.
Hugely. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know too. I think it's like being comfortable when things aren't perfect, because you know that you're going to appreciate when things are good again. It's like, all right, well, this sucks. Everything went wrong. Like in a survival situation, for example, it would be like, all right, I'm freezing cold. I'm starving. I'm thirsty. Like I haven't slept in days. The bugs are eating me. Man, like how good is it going to feel to be in a warm bed with food and water right next to me and no bugs biting me? And it's like, when you can look at a bad situation and be like, well, even if I really have a reason to be upset about what's happening, knowing that could change in an instant, and like almost like living in that like future appreciation of where you're going to be, it changes it right in that moment. And then you realize too, once you're out of that, you're like, oh, I think we don't acknowledge enough. Like, oh, I went through that. I was in this really dark place and now things are great. Like, I'm not going to forget about the dark place, because next time I'm in the dark place, I'm going to know I got through that and it was good again. And it's like, the more you do that, it's again, like working that mental muscle. And I think like those things, like just doing that, like, I feel like, whatever life brings doesn't mean like everything's good and I'm never gonna have a hard time, or that things aren't going to be hard and challenging. It just means when it happens, because it will, I know how to deal with it. And that's not just something I was born with.
And if you want to break me, bugs is the way to do it. Like, you're not going to scare me by making me too hot or too cold or tired or physical pain. Like, been there, done that, but bugs will get me there right now. I watched your first show on
Yes.
Naked and Afraid, and you got lit up by bugs.
Oh, I don't think there was one part of my body that wasn't a scabbed over inflamed bite.
Dude, it's so terrible. It's so terrible. And I haven't been around. What was that biting insect? I can't even pronounce it.
Like, they call them chitras down there, but it was a kind of
Chitras.
sand flea.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
they were relentless, and that you couldn't see them, and you just like felt this really intense sting that you couldn't sleep through. So I'd be sleeping and they were biting me, and I would just be drifting into sleep. It'd be 3 days literally since I've slept. I'm starting to hallucinate. And I just like, you have these bites that just are so sharp that they wake you up. And it was like psychological warfare, it felt like, because you couldn't escape from it even in sleep for a moment. And no matter how tired I got, it's like, I just wanted my body to take over and shut it down. And I was like, how many days can I live without sleep? I've never researched this. Like, at what point do I actually lose my mind? And will it be a good thing when I lose my mind? Because then maybe I can sleep. I don't know. That was a really interesting way to deal with it. It was like, not even having a scrap of clothing to have one area of your body that was protected. And that it was really interesting to see just how much, what limits you could push. And let me tell you, I have no sand fleas biting me right now. Man, do I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. I've been around chiggers, which I feel like is potentially comparable. And I've never been bit as badly as you were, but dude, I would quit if I had the ability to quit and I had 15 bug bites on every square inch of my body. I'd be like, I'm done. Get me out of here. There's no freaking way.
I don't know. Like, I don't even put quitting as an option on the table, because in most situations I've been in, it literally is life or death. And like, I will die. And so in that situation, it was like, even though rationally, if I thought about it, I knew I could leave, I still was like, quitting is not an option. Because I think if I put it out there as an option, like, well, if it gets too bad, or if it gets to this point, I can hit this button and be pulled magically out. Like, if it was there, I think naturally as humans, you just push it. But I just like take that option off the table. And then it's like, all right, how can I make this better for myself? which is literally just bug bites are all mental. Because all those stupid things they tell you about, oh, put mud on yourself. Yeah, cool. Now the mud dried and now I'm just dirty and itchy and I'm just like rubbing dirt into my open, scratched off wounds. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah, no, they watched Predator once and they're like, oh yeah, just roll around in mud. You'll be fine.
Right. Yeah, not so much. Oh, the smoke. No, try it.
No, there's no escaping bad bugs. There's just not. But yeah, that's extremely tough. That impressed me because I know for a fact I would have freaking thrown a white flag in the air immediately. Started crying, snot, like ugly crying, snot coming out of my nose and everything. It would have been terrible.
Oh man.
What's a time being out in the woods that you've been afraid? And the reason I ask this is because a lot of people that live in town are afraid to go outside and into the woods at all. And even like a park can be really intimidating. Like that's a step, but for them to actually spend a night out without any resources at all, like that's an insurmountable fear. But that's a very normal thing for you and me to do for long periods of time. But what is a time where you actually felt sure enough fear?
I mean, I guess like there were, I don't know if it was fear. I think the first few times I ever slept out, like remotely in grizzly country by myself, I was like, I don't know enough about this. And really, I really didn't know enough because I did not know how to play it safe. I was being pretty stupid. But it was more like I hope I make it through this one. Like, I'll deal with it when it comes. I'm going to learn how to like knife fight a grizzly bear, I guess. But I can think of one time where I actually experienced like panic attack, terror, like shut down. And I'm sure this is not the answer that's going to be helpful to people, but it's very real. And I was out in the wilderness. I'd been out for 30 days, no inReach, no satellite phone, no cell service. And I was coming out of I was like hiking down the trail and I had 50 miles of like walking down this trail. And I was about 10 miles. So I was, going to make it out pretty soon. And I just started thinking about the second I got back into service. I'm getting like panicky thinking about this moment. But I started thinking about the fact, I'd been able to live in the moment and I was disconnected and I'd gotten so behind because I hadn't been thinking about everything I've been missing out on. But it was like the moment that my cell phone was going to go off and start like dinging over and over and over and over and over again with all the emails and all the messages. And all of a sudden I was going to have so much to deal with. And I just started doubting everything. Like, can I do that? Can I mentally deal with like the pressure that's going to be on me suddenly? And it's like, it was indescribable. I've never felt kind of like the overwhelming, like I literally had to like drop my bag and put all my stuff down and like remind myself to just breathe in and out because I was panicking. And it was the weirdest thing to have happen. And I came super close to just abandoning everything and running the other way on the trail and living in the woods forever because I was like, I didn't know if I could deal with that. And I think, these other fears that you have, that people have about, is a bear going to eat me or what happens when it's dark or, is a storm going to come and things like that. I think those are things that you have when you're at home. I think that being actually out in the situation, I know that like when I was spending the first nights in grizzly country, I kind of just looked around and I like took like a view in of what my surroundings looked like. And I was like, it's literally going to look the same exact way at night. It's just that the sun's going to be in the wrong spot for me to have its light. And so like, I looked at it at like this very factual, rational way. And I was like, oh, like night's not this terrifying thing. And then just informing myself, the more I learned, like if you're getting the right information, the more you learn. Knowledge is power. And like, once you understand it, we fear what we don't know. And the more I spend time out there, the more I did find time out there, the things that I actually experience fear over are like the ridiculous things like getting cell service. So it's like, I really do. I think it's easy to have those fears at home, and going out is the only way. Like you just have to get over that hump and realize that you've probably watched too many movies where the worst thing happens, but that's not what it's like out there. And when you go out and experience it and you have a good experience and you come back, remind yourself of that, because I mean, I've done some really stupid things. I've thrown myself into the fire when I did not have the knowledge, experience, or, guidance to have a right to really do that. And sure, maybe I've been really lucky, but also, I think we're all just capable of more than we realize. And I just think like, hey, at least I don't have saber-toothed tigers to deal with like my ancestors did. So like, it's going to be all right.
Yeah, it really wasn't very long ago that all of us lived like this, right?
Yeah.
So we're capable of it. We're physically and mentally capable of it. We just don't necessarily have the knowledge skills that we need. And the only way to get those is to read and watch videos and talk to people and then go out and do it. Like you just have to go do it. Experience is the teacher. Do you know the story of John Coulter, the first European to find Yellowstone?
I don't.
So the reason that I'm bringing this up is because it's similar to what you're talking about. When Lewis and Clark were heading out on their expedition, they ran into this guy just a couple days from St. Louis, and he was on his way back. He'd been on a fur trapping mission. So he'd been out for a year, I think, and was almost back to civilization, ran into Lewis and Clark, and he's like, no way, you guys are going all the way to the ocean? I'll come with you. I'll be your hunter. And he was one of the most valuable members of the party. Goes all the way to the Pacific, comes all the way back as he's past the Mandan villages, smooth sailing, coming downstream on the Missouri, almost back to St. Louis again. After the entire expedition, runs into another party that's heading out, and he's like, you know what, boys, I'm going to jump in with you. And he headed straight back out into the wilderness again.
That's awesome. That would be me 100%.
Yeah. So the first name for the Yellowstone area was called Coulter's Hell, because he was the first European to go and see it and make it back and write about it a little bit.
So if it was his hell, was that the place that he like did he not have a good experience there? Or is he like a dark person like me and likes hell?
I think it was because of the sulfur and, all the
Oh,
geothermal activity.
Okay, it's kind of like Firestone.
Yeah, exactly. So taking it from an Old Testament standpoint, he's like, I think maybe this is the spot they were talking about.
Right, like the worlds are kind of close together here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that it is a strange thing to come back. And I used to guide a lot of multi-day whitewater trips, and it was city folks primarily that I was guiding. It wasn't people that were super adventurous. So this was a big step for them to like go out into a place that, was a big, dangerous river canyon with whitewater. And, there wasn't even satellite text, readily available at that time. So, I would watch people sort of transition out of their comfortable lives and then get into the rhythm of camp and of the boats and the water and all that. And a lot of times the parents would be really worried that the kids would be like missing their iPads, especially. And it would take about 6 hours before you could watch that go away. And then suddenly they'd start like playing with sticks and sand on the beach and talking with each other and going and listening to adults talk and then engaging them in conversation, stuff that, just that morning they weren't capable of. They're just in their iPad and that was that. And then they would forget it completely. Like they just get deeper and deeper into it. And by day 3, it's like, this is life now. Like we can do this forever. And it's like, yeah, your clients were doing literally everything for you. So it feels like you can do it forever.
Right.
But then day 4, day 5, you come back and I would watch these people turn their cell phones on. And I would also watch them physically age within seconds as they started feeling that pressure of the outside world and all of the tension from all of the different people in different directions that were pulling on them. And it was really scary for me the first time that I watched these people that, they looked youthful and bright, and then they would hunker over and you'd see lines increase on their face, and they were physically aging in seconds and just getting crushed by this sort of unnatural weight that I don't think we're really supposed to deal with. So I think it's a normal thing for if you've been out for 30 days to come back and be like, oh man, what has gone on here in this big world that is now going to be a problem that I have to deal with?
Oh man. I mean, I didn't even know if I could remember how to like carry a conversation with a person, like when you don't like talk to anything other than trees.
I
and
totally know. Yeah.
I was like, what if I don't know how to talk anymore? And then it was, I think it is. I mean, I wish I had a video actually that you're saying that of me in that moment, like when after that whole experience, actually had to go out and deal with it, because I dealt with it and I didn't die, but like it was not good. But I feel like it would have been like, they have like the before she did meth and after she did meth. It would have been like, it would have been kind of like that. Like if I would have just aged that quickly and then like I would have gone back in the wilderness and again, it would have been the after I did or before I did meth. Like it would have been probably that drastic because I feel like, don't get me wrong, like the first hot shower is so nice. And like, there's definitely comforts that I really appreciate because of that experience, but it's going back into the woods that keeps me alive. It's like, that's the recharge. And that allows me to go a million miles an hour when I'm in this world. Cause it's like this drive to get back out there. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think before people take that step, you don't have any context and you don't know if you're capable of it. But like you said, I mean, I used to take kids from the inner city out and they were kind of like, troubled youth. So it was almost like a punishment. But then the first few days they were freaking out. And then they were so upset that they had to leave and go back to the worlds they left because they were like, they remembered that quickly. I mean, I remember taking a group of kids out. They'd never seen stars until like the big power outage that New York had. And that was the first time they ever saw stars. And I was just like, I can't imagine, it's not like I grew up like as a totally feral child in the wilderness, but like I grew up in suburbia. So even that was a step above having to like be in this really artificial landscape all the time, but how quickly that starts to feel really good. And then you realize that the iPads are there just to fill the void that you don't even know is there because you don't know what you're missing. So I think it's like, yeah, for people who don't get out there, like get over that like imaginary hump because it is in your brain and like you don't have to go out for 30 days on your first trip, like maybe start off a little slower than that, but just getting out there. It's like, if you come back and you don't feel better, man, like I would be shocked. I would love to hear about why not, because for me, it's just I can't imagine my life without it.
I say if you can get to the point where you can stay out there until it is sure enough dark and then walk back with a headlamp, you're good. Like that's the step you need to get to. After you can do that, you can do anything else. You can build into it. Yep. Okay. Last question for you, Laura. I always like to give people a little bit of homework and try and give them a skill to take away or something to improve on. Ooh. So for people who are hunting, camping, whatever, spending time outside, what are some survival skills that you see the general hunting public lacking that they could work on next time they're out hunting and have a little time on their hands?
I mean, I think being able to start a fire in any conditions. So in the pouring rain, in the snow, when it's less than ideal, if your lighter gets wet, you don't have to know how to start a fire with 2 sticks, but know how to make a fire every single time with, my favorite fire starting tool, which is a big lighter. And, I think there's people who know how to start a fire in good conditions, but that's not when you really need it. Next time there's a massive storm and it's super windy and the rain is coming down like crazy and all you want to do is stay inside, go outside and see if you can start a fire. That is the tool that if you're in a really bad situation and you can do that, it saved my life. And that's the one gift. If I could give everyone a gift, it would be to be able to start a fire anywhere, anytime, no matter what.
That is great advice. I love it. And if they fail at starting that fire, they need to come back and read To Build a Fire by Jack London and then go out and figure it out.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
And read it anyway, because it's so good.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time, Laura. We're going to link to all your stuff in the podcast description. I highly encourage you guys to follow Laura. She's a really interesting and genuine person and a pretty good shot with a rifle.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
I live in an old cabin with bad to non-existent insulation and wood heat. That cabin can see snow every month of the year and needs a good amount of firewood stacked in the woodshed to carry through the colder months. This spring, as my woodpile turned to smoke and ash, I noticed something metal pushing out of the decades of sawdust and bark. I kicked at it and unearthed a Stanley thermos. The cup was missing, and it showed more worn stainless steel than green. There were dents in the metal, and the handle looked like a puppy had chewed on it, but it still hadn't leaked the old coffee I could feel slosh inside. It took me back to memories of cutting firewood with my dad, waking up early for an elk hunt, or going out to the canyons to gather cattle. A Stanley thermos has the durability to survive whatever hard work you throw at it. You may find it carries memories as well as coffee. Learn more about their new and classic line of products at stanley1913.com or at your local sporting goods store. And catch you next week. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share the show with a friend. You can also rate the podcast and leave a review. Your support allows me to keep doing what I love, which is meeting incredible folks and sharing their stories with you. For more content and photos, follow the show on Instagram at Six Ranch Podcast or me at Six Ranch Outfitters. This episode was produced by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch Podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Christofferson. Tune in every Monday for a brand new episode of the Six Ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.